Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling this fascinating historical enigma. It's called the Voynich Manuscript. It's this medieval book, codex, that really came to light back in 1912 thanks to a bookseller, Wilfrid Voynich. And honestly, it's like nothing else. Picture turning these old vellum pages, you see this beautiful flowing script, but it's an alphabet nobody recognizes. And it's written around these incredibly bizarre, colorful drawings, plants you can't identify anywhere, weird star charts, and these scenes of naked women bathing in these strange green pools linked by pipes. It's visually just baffling. So yeah, this isn't just some old book. People call it a fundamental paradox. For over a century, it's just resisted every single attempt to understand it.
That really is the heart of it. The big question remains totally unresolved. Is it, some kind of encrypted text? A really tough cipher, or maybe it's written in a language we've lost, or one nobody knew about. Could it even be an artificial language, something someone designed? Or, and this theory just keeps coming back, is it all just a hugely elaborate, very old hoax? The crucial thing to get right from the start is this. People keep claiming they've deciphered it. You see headlines. But none of those claims have ever actually been verified independently. Not one has held up. That's our starting point.
Right. So our goal here in this deep dive isn't to magically decode the text itself. Nobody can yet, but it's to decode where we stand now. What do we actually know about this amazing artifact? We'll go from the solid scientific facts and then look critically at all the different theories, even the really wild ones. Okay, so with something this weird, the first question is often, is it even real? What does science tell us about the book itself? How does that help ground us?
It gives us a surprisingly solid foundation, actually. So the manuscript itself, it's not huge, maybe 22.5 by 16 centimeters. And it's made of animal skin, calf skin specifically. We know that from protein testing. Right now it has about 240 pages. But looking at the way it's put together, the quires, the numbering, it was definitely bigger originally, probably around 272 pages in 20 quires. We know 14 foliars, maybe 2 whole quires, were already gone by the time Voynich found it in 1912. You can see old 15th century quire numbers, then later folio numbers were added. And there's pretty strong evidence the pages got shuffled around at some point. The binding you see now, this goat skin, that's not original. It's from its time later at the Collegio Romano in Rome. And little insect holes suggest it might have had wooden covers even earlier. The vellum itself, it's okay quality.
Yeah.
Average, Some natural flaws, but clearly prepared carefully.
So these physical details, the materials, these are our anchors, right? The things we can say with, near certainty.
That's a perfect way to put it. They're the most solid facts we have. And the radiocarbon dating. That's probably the single most important scientific finding. Back in 2009, a team at the University of Arizona used AMS, accelerator mass spectrometry, on 4 different vellum samples, and the results were incredibly consistent. They found the calf skin was prepared sometime between 1404 and 1438. That's with 95% confidence. So this just authoritatively places the manuscript's creation in the early 15th century.
Wow. Okay. That alone just blows some old theories out of the water, like the Roger Bacon idea.
Exactly. That theory that it was from the 13th century or any theory about it being a later forgery, the carbon dating makes those impossible.
What about the ink and the colors? Do they match that early 15th century date?
They absolutely do. Spot on. Analysis shows the text and the outlines for the drawings were done with a quill pen using iron gall ink that was super common in the Middle Ages. It's chemical makeup, carbon, iron, sulfur, potassium, calcium. It's all perfectly consistent with the period. And what's really key here is that the ink used for the writing and the ink for the drawing outlines, they have very similar characteristics. That strongly suggests the text and the illustrations were made around the same time, contemporaneously. The pigments for the colors, they're mineral-based, pretty inexpensive stuff for the time. The blue is ground azurite. The reddish-brown is red ochre hematite. They were put on a bit crudely, sometimes right over the ink lines, so probably applied after the text was written, but likely not much later.
And the vellum itself, was it brand new when they wrote on it, or was it scraped clean and reused like a Plempims?
Yeah, good question. Vellum was valuable. But no, multispectral analysis done in 2014 showed no signs of earlier writing. It wasn't a palimpsest. The vellum was fresh.
Okay, so let's pull this together. We've got early 15th century dating, period-correct ink and pigments, fresh vellum. What's the big picture takeaway from all this science?
Well, the big takeaway is that this robust, interlocking scientific evidence creates a really formidable barrier against any theories claiming it originated later. Think about that idea some have proposed, a 16th century Aztec origin based on maybe identifying a plant or two.
Right, I've heard that one.
It becomes exceedingly difficult to maintain. because you'd need someone in the 1500s to somehow find a large batch of unused early 1400s calfskin vellum plus matching period ink. It's just highly improbable. So the simplest explanation, the most parsimonious one, is that it's a genuine product of the early 15th century. But, and this is a really crucial nuance, the carbon dating tells us when the calf lived, when the vellum was made. It doesn't tell us when the ideas in the book were first conceived.
Ah, okay. So it could be a copy of something older.
Exactly. It's entirely possible the manuscript we have is a 15th century copy of a text that was originally written much earlier. And what's really fascinating, supporting this idea, is the handwriting analysis, the paleography. It suggests multiple scribes worked on it, perhaps as many as 5 different hands.
5 scribes, not just one person.
Right, which fits perfectly with the idea of a scriptorium, a workshop where books were copied. Also, the text itself. It's remarkably clean, very few corrections. And the illustrations, let's be honest, they often look crude or maybe inept. It's almost as if they were being copied by people who didn't fully understand the subject matter they were drawing.
Huh. Like they were just told, copy this.
Kind of. It paints this compelling picture. Maybe a team of scribes dutifully copying a source text, possibly one they couldn't even read or fully grasp. And if that's true, it fundamentally changes the whole inquiry. It opens the door to the actual content originating well before 1400.
That really does shift things. It's not just about when the book was made, but when the information came from. Okay, let's switch gears. What about its history, its ownership? It sounds like a real mystery tour.
It is, yeah. The provenance is incredibly fragmented. Its known history really starts in Prague, what we call the Prague connection, roughly 1576 to 1665. The earliest reported owner, though we don't have absolute proof, was the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II. He reigned 1576 to 1612, famous for his interest in alchemy and the occult. According to a letter written much later, in 1665 or 66, by a man named Johannes Marcus Marci, Rudolf supposedly paid 600 gold ducats for it, a huge sum.
600 ducats. He must have thought it was incredibly important or incredibly valuable.
Exactly. And there's some recent research suggesting a specific purchase record from 1599 might match up. Plus, there's this faint signature on the first page. It seems to be Jacobus Horsecki de Tepanik. And he was Rudolf's court pharmacist, so circumstantial evidence linking it to Rudolf's court.
Okay, so maybe Rudolf owned it. Who definitely owned it first?
The first owner we can confirm is a man named Georg Beresch. He was a 17th century alchemist, also in Prague. By 1639, he definitely had the book. He called it a sphinx he couldn't read. He was so perplexed he actually sent sample pages to Rome to the famous Jesuit scholar Athanasius Kircher, hoping Kircher could decipher it.
Did Kircher figure it out?
Nope. Kircher was interested, but apparently didn't get far with just the samples. After Beresch died, the book went to his friend, Johannes Marcus Marci, the guy who wrote that letter later. And it was Marci who finally decided to send the entire book to Kircher in Rome around 1665 or 1666. And with the book, he sent that now famous cover letter. That's the letter that mentioned Rudolph's supposed purchase and crucially repeated the belief that the author was Roger Bacon.
Ah, so that's where the Roger Bacon connection came from that 17th century letter.
Precisely. It wasn't based on anything earlier, just hearsay Marci was passing on.
So Kircher gets the book in Rome. Then what? Did it just vanish into the Vatican archives or something?
Pretty much. It entered what scholars call the Roman silence, lasting from about 1666 all the way to 1912. The assumption is it became part of Kircher's vast library at the Collegio Romano, that's now the Pontifical Gregorian University. It probably just sat there for centuries. Then, in the 1870s, during Italian unification, the state was confiscating some church properties. To protect valuable books, some were apparently moved to private faculty libraries. We know it ended up with books belonging to Petrus Bex, who was the head of the Jesuit order at the time his book plate is in it. From there, the collection seems to have been moved to the Villa Mondragone, a Jesuit college outside Rome.
And Villa Mondragone, that rings a bell. That's where Wilfrid Voynich found it.
Exactly. That's where it reemerged into the modern world in 1912. Wilfrid Voynich, this Polish-American rare book dealer, acquired it. It was part of a batch of about 30 manuscripts the Jesuits were selling, likely to raise funds.
Was the sale controversial at all?
There have been some questions raised about the exact circumstances. Voynich himself fueled the mystique. He often told a vague story about finding it in a castle in southern Europe, which was probably, a bit of salesmanship. But Voynich became absolutely obsessed with it. He promoted it heavily, made photostats, and sent them to scholars trying to get it deciphered. And he really pushed that Roger Bacon theory, even though, as we now know, the dating completely refutes it. He tried to sell it for $100,000.
Did he ever sell it?
No. After he died in 1930, it went to his widow, Ethel Voynich, who was a novelist. She held on to it until 1960. Then it passed to her friend, Anne Nill, for a short time. Nill sold it in 1961 for $24,500 to another famous rare book dealer, Hans P. Krauss. Krauss tried to sell it too, asking $160,000, but couldn't find a buyer at that price. So in 1969, he very generously donated it to Yale University.
Ah, so that's how it ended up at Yale's Beinecke Library as MS-408.
That's right. And reflecting on this history, it's amazing how much influence that 17th century letter from Marcy had. The claims about Rudolph, and especially about Roger Bacon, they sent researchers, brilliant people like William Newbold in the 1920s, down this century-long blind alley trying to find complex ciphers based on Bacon's supposed authorship.
Until the carbon dating in 2009 finally proved Bacon couldn't have written it.
Exactly. It just shows how historical hearsay repeated over time can completely misdirect research for generations.
Incredible. Okay, let's dive into the text itself, the core enigma. Voyniches, people call it. It looks structured, rational.
Yeah.
But nobody can read a word. What do we know about the writing system?
Well, it's unique. As far as we know, this script appears nowhere else. It's written very fluently, left to right, top to bottom. The left margin is usually pretty straight. The right margin is kind of justified, like in a normal book. It definitely looks alphabetic. You see discrete character symbols grouped together into what look like words separated by spaces. And these words form lines that look like sentences or paragraphs.
How many different characters are there? Is it like our alphabet?
That's debated, but most researchers agree there are probably 20 to 30 core characters that appear frequently, plus a bunch of rarer ones that might be variations or maybe symbols with special meanings. Some characters look a bit like Latin letters or maybe Arabic numerals from the period. Others are completely unique. And then there are these really distinctive ones researchers call gallows characters. They're transcribed in one common system, EVA, as things like T, P, F. They have these tall, rising strokes, like a gallows.
Gallows characters, okay.
Yeah, and what's odd is they almost always appear right at the beginning of a word. Very rarely in the middle or at the end.
And you mentioned earlier that it wasn't just one person writing this script.
Right. For a long time, people assumed it was a single author. But a major breakthrough came in the 1970s from Prescott Currier, a U.S. military cryptanalyst. He noticed distinct statistical differences in different parts of the manuscript, different patterns of how characters and words were used. He called them language A and language B, and crucially, he saw these statistical differences correlated with subtle but consistent differences in handwriting style. That was the first really solid evidence for multiple authors.
And more recent work is built on that.
Yes. Dr. Lisa Fagan Davis, a medievalist who specializes in manuscripts, has done extensive paleographic analysis. Building on Currier's work, she's identified at least 5 distinct scribal hands.
5 different people writing in this unique script.
Seems so. And their contributions generally align with the physical structure, the korikais. It really suggests a collaborative process or maybe a sequential one happening over time, like in a scriptorium. For instance, Hand 1 seems to have written most of the language A herbal sections. Hand 2 did the language B herbal parts and the biological, the bathing sections.
The implications of that are huge, aren't they? If 5 people could write this script.
It makes the idea of a single eccentric hoaxer just inventing it all much, much less likely. How do you coordinate 5 people to consistently write meaningless gibberish in a complex, invented script with subtle dialectical differences? It becomes a very complicated conspiracy.
Okay, this is where it gets really fascinating for me. The statistical properties. It looks like language, but it behaves weirdly.
That's the absolute core paradox. On the one hand, yes, it has properties that look remarkably like natural language. It's definitely not just random scribbles. For example, the frequency of its words follows Zipf's law. That's a pattern seen in basically all human languages. A few words are extremely common. Lots of words are very rare.
Like the versus anti-disestablishmentarianism in English.
Exactly like that. Voynich's follows that pattern. Also, measures of its entropy, basically, its randomness or predictability show it has structure. It's more ordered than random noise. These language-like features are the main reason many researchers argue it can't be a simple hoax. It's too structured in ways that are hard to fake convincingly, especially in the 15th century.
But there's a but.
There's a big but. Despite those features, Voynich also behaves in ways that are very unnatural for any known language. Its second-order entropy is quite low. That means it's highly repetitive and predictable at the level of character sequences, much more so than Latin or English. It gives the text this strange, almost chanting or babbling quality.
Repetitive. How so?
Well, certain character combinations appear over and over again in very rigid ways. Remember those gallows characters? Almost always word initial. Other combinations, like what EVA transcribes as Getty or Thea, almost always appear at the end of words. It suggests a really strict internal word structure, maybe like prefix, stem suffix, but far more rigid than the morphology you see in natural languages. And then there's just blatant repetition. Words, even identical pairs of words like quotity, repeat far, far more often than you'd ever expect to see in meaningful text.
Wow. So it follows some language rules like Zipf's law, but breaks others with this extreme repetition and rigidity. That is a paradox.
It absolutely is. This coexistence of linguistic and non-linguistic patterns is why it's so baffling. It's what cryptographer Nick Pelling called its lack of flatness. It's not smoothly like language, nor is it simply random or rigidly encoded. Any theory that hopes to solve the Voynich has to first explain how this fundamental paradox can even exist. How can a single system produce both sets of contradictory properties at the same time?
And this paradox also makes the hoax theory even harder to swallow.
It does. Imagine trying to design a hoax with these specific, contradictory statistical features written consistently by 5 different people. It starts to sound more complicated than just copying a real, albeit strange, text they didn't understand. The evidence leans away from a simple hoax.
Okay, since the text is basically a brick wall for now, what about the illustrations? They're just as weird. What can they tell us?
Well, they're our main clue to the subject matter, even if they're ambiguous. Conventionally, the manuscript's divided into maybe 6 sections based on the pictures. The biggest section, about half the book, is the botanical part. Over 100 pages with illustrations of plants.
Plants we can identify.
That's the problem. The vast majority, no. They don't clearly match any known species. Many look like composite fantasies, like someone stuck the leaves of one plant onto the roots of another with the flower of a third.
So what are the theories about these plants?
Well, maybe they are real European plants just drawn very badly by someone with no botanical skill. Or there was a theory by botanist Arthur Tucker suggesting some were New World plants, like sunflowers or morning glories, implying a 16th century Mexican origin.
But the carbon dating rules that out.
Exactly. The 1404-1438 date makes a 16th century New World connection almost impossible for the manuscript's creation. Or maybe the plants are purely symbolic or imaginary, part of some alchemical or cosmological system we don't recognize.
Okay, what other sections are there?
There's an astronomical or astrological section, lots of intricate circular diagrams, suns, moons, stars. But again, the constellations aren't the ones we know from standard Western or Arabic traditions. You can identify some zodiac signs. Pisces, Aries, Taurus is pretty clear, often shown with these little naked female figures, the nymphs, embedded in them.
Even the zodiac is weird.
Yeah, it's idiosyncratic. The cycle seems to start with Pisces in March, not Aries. Aries and Taurus are shown twice, and Capricorn and Aquarius seem to be missing entirely. Stylistically, though, they do look a bit like German or Northern French zodiacs from the 14th or 15th century. Oh, and a curious detail, on some of the zodiac pages, the names of the months are written faintly nearby in a different script. Experts have identified that script as 15th century Occitan, a language from southern France.
Occitan. That's fascinating. A tiny scrap of readable text almost. Okay, we have to talk about the bathing ladies. Those pages are just unforgettable. What is going on there?
Yes, the balneological section, sometimes called biological. It's definitely the most bizarre and visually striking part for many people. You have these elaborate drawings of pools, basins, interconnected tubes and channels, all filled with this strange green or sometimes blue liquid. And floating or standing in them are scores of these small naked female figures. Often they have oddly prominent abdomens. They're bathing, sometimes holding objects, interacting with the plumbing.
What could it possibly mean? Medicinal baths.
That's the most straightforward theory. It's about balneology, therapeutic bathing, or medicinal spas, which was a known practice. The structures could represent complex spa systems. Other ideas connected to women's health, maybe gynecology, or even human reproduction, given the figures. Some have suggested alchemy, but the equipment doesn't really look like standard alchemical apparatus. It's possible the nymphs, as they're called, are symbolic. Maybe their poses, the objects they hold, some seem to wear crowns or hold rings, carry specific meanings we just don't get.
It's just layers upon layers of mystery. Are there other sections?
Briefly, yes. There's a section sometimes called cosmological, with more complex diagrams. The most famous is the big fold-out page, with 9 interconnected circular medallions, the rosettes page. It's full of patterns that look like stars, or maybe cells, or even architecture. Its purpose, entirely unknown. Then there's a pharmaceutical section. This shows isolated plant parts, leaves, roots, stems, often next to drawings that look like apothecary jars, the kind used for storing herbs or medicines. This strongly suggests herbal remedies. And finally, the last section is often called the recipes. It's just dense blocks of text, no pictures, organized into over 300 short paragraphs, each marked with a little star-like symbol in the margin. People interpret this as a collection of short formulas, instructions, or recipes.
So overall, the pictures hint at maybe a scientific or medical encyclopedia of some kind. But the details are just as unreadable as the script.
Exactly. They seem to guide the overall structure, suggesting topics like botany, astronomy, medicine. But the specifics remain completely ambiguous. People have tried desperately to use the pictures as a kind of Rosetta Stone to unlock the text, but it hasn't worked. They don't resolve the mystery, they just deepen it.
Okay, let's try to unpack the main theories about what this whole thing is. Given the text, the pictures, the science, what are the leading explanations people have proposed over the years?
You can really boil them down to four main hypotheses, though there are variations within each. First, you've got the hoax theory. The idea here is it's just meaningless gibberish, cleverly designed to look like a real book, maybe to fool a wealthy patron like Emperor Rudolph II, or perhaps just as an exercise in assignment art centuries ahead of its time.
What's the evidence for it being a hoax?
Well, the sheer weirdness, for one. The unidentifiable plants, the bizarre baiting scenes, and those unnatural text statistics we talked about, the low entropy, the high repetition. Some researchers, like Gordon Rugg, have even shown you can generate text with some similar statistical properties using simple tools like a card and grill, which existed later in the 16th century.
But what argues against it being a hoax?
The complexity. It adheres to Zipf's law and other subtle linguistic patterns that seem really hard to fake, especially without computers. Think about the cost a book like this, all that calfskin vellum, the ink, the pigments, the time. It was a massive undertaking. Why go to that expense for nonsense? And crucially, those 5 distinct scribal hands. Coordinating 5 people to produce a consistent, complex fake seems incredibly difficult, maybe even harder than just copying a real text.
Right, the 5 scribes again.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the second big theory?
The cipher theory. This is Voynich's isn't meaningless, it's just encrypted. It's a known language, maybe Latin or Italian, German, maybe even Hebrew, hidden using some kind of code or cipher.
Why would someone encrypt it?
Well, cryptography was definitely around and becoming more sophisticated in 15th century Italy. Some Voynich characters do resemble symbols used in early Renaissance ciphers, and there could be many motives to hide knowledge. Maybe it contained heretical ideas, or secret medical formulas, or alchemical secrets.
Makes sense. What's the problem with the cipher theory?
The main problem is, again, the statistics. Most simple substitution or polyalphabetic ciphers tend to flatten out the statistical properties of the underlying language. Voynich's doesn't look like that. It has its own very distinct and very strange statistical profile. Plus, it's resisted attacks by some of the world's best cryptanalysts for decades. People who broke codes like Enigma, the Japanese per LPL code during WWII. They looked at Voynich and couldn't crack it. If it is a cipher, it would have to be incredibly complex and sophisticated for its time. Perhaps unprecedentedly so.
Okay. Not a simple cipher then. What's theory number 3?
The natural language theory. This suggests the text is written in a real human language, just one we haven't identified, using a unique alphabet invented specifically for it. Maybe it's a lost European dialect, or perhaps something from further afield. People have proposed everything from Old Turkic languages to Romani dialects.
What supports that idea?
Mainly, the fact that it does follow Zipf's law and shows other signs of linguistic structure, that feels like natural language, but the arguments against it are those highly unnatural features we keep coming back to. The rigid word structure, the low entropy, the excessive repetition. These things just don't look like any known natural language, and of course, nobody's actually managed to translate it as a natural language.
Okay, which leads us to the fourth major hypothesis, the one that seems to address the paradox.
Yes. The artificial language theory, or conlang theory. This proposes Voynich's isn't a natural language, nor a simple cipher, nor pure gibberish, but a purposefully constructed language, like Esperanto or the philosophical languages people started designing a bit later.
How would that explain the weird mix of features?
Well, this is why it's appealing to some researchers. It offers perhaps the most elegant potential explanation for that central paradox. You could theoretically design a language to have language-like features of vocabulary, grammar rules, maybe even structure it to follow Zipf's law, but you could also build in highly artificial rules like that rigid positional syntax for certain characters, or allow for high repetition. So a conline could, in principle, account for that baffling mix of natural and unnatural statistical properties that makes Voynich's so unique.
What's the catch?
The catch is there's absolutely no direct evidence for it. It's purely theoretical. And constructing a language this complex, apparently for just this one book back in the early 15th century, well, it would have been a truly remarkable intellectual achievement. We don't really know of clear precedents for something like that back then.
So 4 main possibilities. Hoax, cipher, unknown natural language, artificial language. And none of them fits perfectly.
Not perfectly, no. Each has points for and against it.
Now, what about all those decipherment claims we see pop up in the news every few years? They generate buzz, then seem to fade away. Why do they keep failing? Can we learn anything from them?
We can, actually. Looking at failed attempts is very instructive. There are common pitfalls. Let's take a couple of examples. Remember Nicholas Gibbs in 2017? He claimed it was a women's health guide written in a kind of abbreviated shorthand Latin. Made quite a splash initially.
I think I remember that one.
It was very quickly and thoroughly debunked by medieval Latin experts and manuscript scholars. His translations were often grammatically impossible in Latin, the supposed abbreviations didn't match known systems, the medical concepts weren't novel, and the whole thing relied on him claiming there is a missing index that conveniently explained everything. It's a classic case of subjective interpretation, seeing what you want to see, ignoring contradictory evidence, and producing something that nobody else can replicate.
Okay, that sounds pretty bad. Any others?
Well, there was Gerard Cheshire in 2019. He claimed it was written in something he called proto-romance, which, linguistically speaking, isn't really a coherent concept. His university actually put out a press release initially, but then had to retract it after a massive backlash from linguists pointing out fundamental errors in his understanding of language evolution and historical linguistics. It was described by many experts as basically circular reasoning, finding patterns that weren't really there.
So jumping to conclusions without the right expertise.
Often, yes.
Yeah.
Or applying methods from one field inappropriately to another. Another example, maybe more cautious, was Stephen Bax in 2014. He was an applied linguistics professor. He tried a bottom-up approach, trying to tentatively identify just a few words by matching them to illustrations, like identifying a plant he thought looked like juniper and assigning sound values to the letters in the word next to it.
That sounds more reasonable. Did it work?
Not really, no. The problem was his plant identifications were highly speculative. Is that really juniper? Could be something else entirely. And the letter sound mappings he proposed based on these few tentative anchors turned out to be inconsistent when applied elsewhere. Like, he ended up with 3 different Voynich characters, all supposedly representing the R sound. The system just didn't scale up or hold together. It highlights the fundamental difficulty of using these ambiguous illustrations as a reliable key, as a Rosetta Stone. They're just too open to interpretation.
So what's the pattern here with these failed attempts?
The recurring pattern seems to be confirmation bias. People develop a hypothesis, then they find a few words or images that seem to fit, and they declare victory. But the solution only works for a tiny fraction of the manuscript and completely falls apart when you try to apply it systematically to the whole thing. The Voynich isn't likely to be solved by a single eureka moment based on one word or one picture. It requires a theory, a proposed system, that can consistently account for all of its strange and contradictory features, the script, the stats, the images, the physical evidence simultaneously. Nobody's managed that yet.
So after all this, where does that leave us? More than a century on, the Voynich manuscript is still this compelling, but also deeply frustrating enigma. It feels like we know a lot, but understand almost nothing.
That's a very good summary. There's this huge gap, this chasm, between what we know with high certainty and what remains profoundly mysterious. We know it's a real physical artifact from the early 15th century, 1404 to 1438, made of calfskin vellum, iron gall ink. We know at least 5 different scribes wrote it. We know the text isn't random gibberish. It has definite structure. Those things are solid. But then there's the abyss of the unknown. Who wrote it? Where exactly? Why? What does it say? We can't read the language. We can't identify most of the plants. We don't recognize the constellations. We don't understand those bizarre bathing scenes or the cosmological charts. Every proposed solution has ultimately failed validation.
Looking ahead, then, is there hope? Do new technologies offer any pathway forward? AI, maybe?
There's always hope. Advanced imaging is one area. Techniques like multispectral imaging are getting better all the time. That's how they recently found some erased notes on one page, likely written by Johannes Marcus Marci himself in the 17th century, proving even early owners were trying and failing to figure it out. So maybe more physical clues are hidden in the parchment.
And AI. Can computers crack it?
AI in computational linguistics can certainly help analyze the text patterns in powerful new ways. Machine learning can find structures humans might miss. But there's a fundamental limitation. The Voynich manuscript is a unique data set of one. AI works best when it has lots of data to learn from, or when it knows the parameters of the problem, like the underlying language of a cipher. With Voynich, we have neither. So AI is probably more likely to find interesting patterns in the text than it is to actually divine its meaning on its own. It needs a theoretical breakthrough to guide it.
So maybe the final thought for you, the listener, is this. Perhaps the point isn't a translation.
That's a profound possibility. The great writer and semiotician Umberto Eco, who was fascinated by the Voynich, once mused that it might be a perfect cipher that may have no key. Perhaps its enduring power, its fascination, lies precisely in its ability to resist interpretation. It's become this unique object onto which each generation projects its own methods, its own obsessions. It's like a mirror reflecting the history of cryptanalysis, linguistics, and our attempts to make sense of the unknown.
So, the quest to solve the Voynich manuscript.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's less about the destination, the answer, and more about the journey. It's a story about how we think, how we analyze, how our own systems of knowledge evolve.
Exactly. Its final meaning might not be found in a decoded message, but in its unwavering status as a testament to the limits of our understanding and the enduring, profound allure of a perfect mystery.